The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Charles stood at the tall windows of his private study, watching the groundskeepers tend to the rose gardens below. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, showing a man who had aged considerably in the past few months. The weight of the crown was nothing compared to the weight of family discord that pressed down on his shoulders daily. Kate's footsteps echoed softly in the marble hallway outside his door. He had asked her to come early, before the rest of the household stirred. These private conversations had become their lifeline, a way to navigate the treacherous waters that royal life had become since his coronation. "Your Majesty," Kate said softly as she entered, offering a respectful curtsy despite their close relationship. Even in private, she maintained the protocols that kept their world functioning. "Please, Kate. Just Charles when we're alone like this," he replied, turning from the window. "We need to talk about yesterday's incident." Kate settled into the chair across from his desk, her posture straight but her eyes showing the strain of recent weeks. The incident he referred to had shaken the entire household. During what should have been a routine family dinner, Camilla had erupted into a fit of rage that left everyone stunned and uncomfortable. "She's getting worse," Kate said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "William is concerned about how this affects the children. They've started asking questions we don't know how to answer." Charles nodded gravely. The children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, had always looked up to their grandfather. But lately, family gatherings had become minefields of tension. Camilla's jealousy toward Kate had grown from subtle disapproval to outright hostility, and Charles found himself constantly caught in the middle. The trouble had started months earlier when Charles began relying more heavily on Kate's judgment for royal matters. Her natural grace, intelligence, and genuine connection with the public made her an invaluable advisor. Where Camilla often struggled with the demands of royal life, Kate seemed to understand instinctively what was needed. "I remember when she first joined the family," Charles continued, moving to sit behind his desk. "Camilla was so different then. Perhaps the pressure of being queen consort has changed her more than any of us anticipated." Kate shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She had tried repeatedly to build a relationship with Camilla, but every gesture of friendship had been met with suspicion or outright rejection. The older woman seemed to view Kate as a threat rather than an ally. "Yesterday, when she screamed at me in front of the staff," Kate said, her voice trembling slightly, "she accused me of trying to undermine her position. She said I was manipulating you against her." Charles closed his eyes, remembering the scene. Camilla had lost control completely, her voice rising to a pitch that could be heard throughout the east wing of the castle. She had pointed accusing fingers at Kate, claiming that the younger woman was poisoning Charles's mind against his own wife. The accusations were not just hurtful but dangerous. In the world of royal politics, perception often mattered more than reality. If word of these private conflicts leaked to the press, it could cause irreparable damage to the monarchy's reputation. "I want you to know that I don't believe any of her accusations," Charles said firmly. "Your counsel has been invaluable to me, and your dedication to this family and the crown is beyond question." Kate felt a wave of relief wash over her. The constant attacks from Camilla had begun to make her question her own actions and motivations. Having Charles's explicit support meant everything. "But we need to find a way forward," Charles continued. "This situation is becoming untenable. The staff are walking on eggshells. William is frustrated, and the children are sensing the tension even when we try to shield them." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in thought. Outside, the morning sun had begun to burn off the mist, revealing the manicured gardens in their full glory. It was a peaceful scene that contrasted sharply with the turmoil inside the castle walls. "What if we arranged for some time apart?" Kate suggested hesitantly. "Perhaps if Camilla had some space, some time to pursue her own interests without feeling like she's competing for your attention, she might find her equilibrium again." Charles considered this suggestion carefully. It wasn't unusual for members of the royal family to maintain separate schedules, especially when their interests and duties diverged. But suggesting that his wife needed space felt like admitting failure in his marriage. "The public would notice," he said finally. "They're already speculating about tensions within the family." Any significant change in our public appearances together would fuel more rumors. Kate understood his dilemma. The royal family lived under constant scrutiny, and every action was analyzed and interpreted by the media and the public. They couldn't simply act like a normal family dealing with normal problems. Then perhaps we approach it differently, Kate said. What if we gradually shifted some responsibilities? Camilla has always been passionate about literacy programs and domestic violence awareness. We could increase her involvement in those areas, giving her a stronger individual platform. It was a diplomatic suggestion, one that acknowledged Camilla's genuine contributions, while potentially reducing the areas where she and Kate might clash. Charles appreciated Kate's thoughtful approach, even in the face of personal attacks. "You're more generous than I would be in your position," he told her honestly. "Camilla's behavior toward you has been inexcusable." Kate smiled sadly. "She's your wife, Charles. She's part of this family. And despite everything, I want us all to find a way to work together. The alternative is too damaging for everyone involved." As they continued their conversation, neither of them noticed the figure listening outside the door. Camilla had risen early, intending to speak with Charles before his day began, but she had arrived to find Kate already in his study. Standing in the hallway, she had heard every word of their conversation, and with each sentence, her anger had grown. From her perspective, Kate's suggestions sounded exactly like the manipulation she had accused the younger woman of. Here was Kate, sitting in Charles's study, discussing Camilla's future as if she were a problem to be managed, rather than the queen consort. The conversation in the study continued for another hour, covering various aspects of royal duties and family responsibilities. Charles found himself impressed once again by Kate's insight and diplomatic skills. She had a way of seeing solutions where he saw only problems, and her genuine care for the family's well-being was evident in every suggestion she made. When Kate finally left the study, she walked past the spot where Camilla had been standing, unaware that her conversation with Charles had been overheard. Camilla had retreated to her own rooms by then, her mind racing with plans for confrontation. The rest of the day proceeded with the usual round of royal duties and obligations. Charles attended meetings with government officials, reviewed correspondence, and participated in a virtual conference with Commonwealth leaders. Kate managed her own schedule of charitable engagements and public appearances, maintaining the polished facade that the public expected. But beneath the surface, tensions continued to simmer. The palace staff, always sensitive to the moods of the royal family, moved with extra caution. They had all witnessed Camilla's explosive behavior in recent weeks, and they knew that any small misstep could trigger another outburst. By evening, when the family gathered for their private dinner, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. William had arrived with the children, hoping for a peaceful family meal, but he could sense immediately that something was wrong. George, now old enough to pick up on adult tensions, looked uncertainly between his grandfather and step-grandmother. Charlotte and Louis, younger and more focused on their food, seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, but even they were quieter than usual. "How was everyone's day?" Charles asked, attempting to maintain normalcy. William began describing his morning visit to a veterans' charity, while Kate shared details about her afternoon at a children's hospital. The conversation felt forced, but it was familiar territory that allowed them to avoid more dangerous topics. Camilla sat in silence, barely touching her food. Her eyes moved constantly between Charles and Kate, watching for signs of the special understanding she was convinced existed between them. Every shared glance, every moment when Charles seemed to pay closer attention to Kate's words than to hers, felt like a confirmation of her worst fears. As dessert was served, young George looked up at his step-grandmother and asked innocently, "Grandmama Camilla, are you feeling sick? You look sad." George ran Mama. Of quarter, the question hung in the air like a challenge. All eyes turned to Camilla, waiting for her response. For a moment, her expression softened as she looked at the young prince, and it seemed like she might offer a gentle, reassuring answer. Instead, her face hardened, and she pushed back from the table abruptly. "I'm perfectly fine. Thank you," she said curtly, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "I'm simply tired of people questioning everything I do and say." The comment was clearly directed at the adults, rather than at George, but the little boy looked confused and hurt by her sharp tone. Kate immediately reached over to reassure him, while William looked increasingly uncomfortable. Charles recognized the warning signs. Camilla's behavior was following the same pattern as her previous outbursts. The initial attempt at control, followed by increasingly pointed comments, and finally the explosion that left everyone shaken. "Perhaps we should discuss this later, in private," he suggested carefully, hoping to diffuse the situation before it escalated in front of the children. "Oh, I'm sure Kate has already discussed it with you," Camilla snapped, abandoning any pretense of civility. "I'm sure she's already told you exactly what you should think about my behavior." And William immediately stood up. "I think it's time we got the children home," he said firmly, beginning to gather their things. Kate nodded in agreement, helping Charlotte down from her chair while maintaining a calm demeanor despite the rising tension. "Running away again?" Camilla continued, her voice rising. "How convenient. Leave me here to be the villain while perfect Kate escapes criticism once more." Number 3. Charles had heard enough. Rising from his chair, he spoke in a voice that carried the authority of both a king and a husband. "That is quite enough. Camilla, you will not speak to Kate or William in this manner, especially in front of the children." The room fell silent, except for the sound of little Louis asking his mother why everyone looked angry. Kate quickly distracted him, while William finished gathering their belongings, both parents working efficiently to remove the children from what had clearly become an adult conflict. As the family prepared to leave, Camilla made one final attempt to justify her behavior. "I suppose you'll all go back to discussing how unreasonable I am," she said bitterly. "I suppose Charles will once again turn to his precious daughter-in-law for advice on how to handle his difficult wife." Ahmed. Charles looked at his wife with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. The woman he had married, the woman who had been his companion through so many challenges, seemed to have been replaced by someone he barely recognized. Her jealousy and insecurity were destroying not just her relationships with other family members, but her own peace of mind. "We will discuss this when you are calm," he said simply, his tone final. After William and Kate left with the children, Charles returned to his study while Camilla retreated to her rooms. The castle, so full of life and conversation just hours earlier, now felt empty and cold. The staff moved quietly through their evening duties, aware that the royal family was once again in crisis. In his study, Charles stood once more at the windows, looking out at gardens that had witnessed centuries of royal drama. He thought about his conversation with Kate that morning, about her generous suggestions for helping Camilla find her place and purpose. He thought about Camilla's accusations and her increasing inability to control her emotions in difficult situations. Most of all, he thought about the children and how this ongoing conflict was affecting them. George's innocent question about whether Camilla was sick had revealed how perceptive children could be about adult emotions, even when adults thought they were hiding their problems successfully. The silence in the castle spoke volumes about the state of his family relationships. Where there should have been laughter and conversation, there was now tension and careful distance. Where there should have been mutual support and understanding, there was suspicion and accusation. Charles realized that his morning conversation with Kate had been just the beginning. The problems within his family would not be solved by a single discussion or even a series of diplomatic suggestions. Something fundamental had shifted in the dynamics of their relationships, and finding a way forward would require difficult decisions and painful conversations. As the evening stretched on, he remained at his window, watching the lights come on in the staff quarters and the nearby village. Each light represented lives and families dealing with their own challenges and conflicts, but few faced the unique pressures of living in the public eye while trying to maintain personal relationships. The weight of leadership had always been heavy, but Charles was beginning to understand that leading a family could be just as difficult as leading a nation. The crown might give him authority, but it could not give him the wisdom to heal the growing rift between the people he loved most. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to either bridge the gaps that had opened between them, or to watch those gaps widen further. For tonight, the silence in Windsor Castle spoke louder than any words could about the fragile state of the royal family's unity. 3 weeks had passed since the explosive dinner that sent William and Kate rushing home with the children. The royal household had settled into an uneasy routine where Charles and Camilla maintained their public duties while carefully avoiding private confrontations. But beneath the surface, the problems continued to fester like an untreated wound. Kate found herself walking on eggshells whenever Camilla was present. The queen consort's behavior had become increasingly unpredictable, swinging from icy silence to sudden bursts of criticism. The palace staff had begun to whisper among themselves, creating an atmosphere of tension that permeated every corridor and meeting room. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, the royal physician, had been quietly observing these changes during her regular visits to the castle. As someone who had served the royal family for over 2 decades, she had seen them through various personal and political crises. But the current situation troubled her in ways that went beyond typical family disputes. "Your Majesty," she said carefully during her weekly consultation with Charles, "I've noticed some concerning patterns in the queen consort's behavior that suggest she might benefit from professional support." Charles looked up from the medical reports he had been reviewing. "What kind of support are you suggesting?" Dr. Thornfield chose her words carefully. Mental health remained a sensitive topic, even in progressive royal circles. "Camilla appears to be experiencing significant stress that's manifesting in ways that could be addressed with proper counseling. The transition to queen consort, combined with the natural pressures of royal life, can be overwhelming for anyone." The suggestion hung in the air between them. Charles understood what the doctor was implying without her having to state it directly. Camilla's erratic behavior, her jealousy toward Kate, her increasing inability to control her emotions in public settings, all pointed to someone struggling with mental health challenges. "She would never agree to see a counselor," Charles said quietly. "She views any suggestion of psychological help as an attack on her competence." "Perhaps we could approach it differently, Doctor," Thornfield suggested. "Executive coaching, stress management, even couples counseling framed as relationship enhancement, rather than problem solving. The important thing is that she receives professional support before the situation deteriorates further." That afternoon, Kate arrived for another private meeting with Charles, continuing their series of discussions about family and royal matters. These conversations had become essential for both of them, providing a space where they could speak honestly about the challenges they faced. "I've been thinking about your suggestion regarding Camilla's charitable work," Charles said as Kate settled into her usual chair. "I spoke with the charities she's involved with, and they're enthusiastic about expanding her role." Kate nodded approvingly. "The Literacy Foundation seems particularly excited about the new reading program. Having Camilla as the primary patron could really increase their visibility and funding." "That's what I hoped," Charles replied. "But I'm concerned about how to present this to her without making it seem like we're pushing her aside or managing her like a problem child." The delicate nature of their situation required constant, careful navigation. Every decision had to be considered not just for its practical merits but for how it might be perceived by Camilla, by other family members, and potentially by the public if details leaked to the press. "What if we let her suggest the expanded role herself?" Kate proposed. "During the next family meeting, we could discuss the challenges facing various charities and let the conversation naturally lead to ways she might help." Charles appreciated Kate's diplomatic thinking. She had a gift for finding solutions that allowed everyone to maintain their dignity while still addressing underlying problems. It was one of the qualities that made her such an effective royal and such a trusted advisor. Unknown to either of them, Camilla had developed a pattern of listening to their conversations whenever possible. She had discovered that by positioning herself in a particular alcove near Charles's study, she could overhear much of what was discussed inside. Today's conversation about her charitable work only confirmed her suspicions that she was being managed and manipulated. From her hiding place, she heard Kate's suggestion about letting her propose the expanded role herself. To Camilla, this sounded like elaborate psychological manipulation, a way of making her feel like she had control, while actually being guided toward predetermined conclusions. Her anger built with each word she overheard. Here was Kate, once again positioning herself as the wise counselor who understood how to handle the difficult queen consort. Here was Charles, accepting Kate's advice about his own wife, while apparently never considering that he might simply talk directly to Camilla about these issues. The conversation in the study continued for nearly an hour, covering various aspects of royal duties and family relationships. Charles and Kate discussed upcoming events, potential scheduling conflicts, and ways to ensure that all family members felt valued and included in royal activities. "I want to try something different for the next family dinner," Charles said thoughtfully. "Instead of our usual formal approach, what if we made it more casual? Maybe had the children help plan some activities? Gave everyone a chance to share something they're excited about?" Kate smiled at the suggestion. "That sounds wonderful. George has been working on a history project about medieval knights. He'd probably love to share what he's learned with his grandfather. And Charlotte's been taking writing lessons," Charles added, his face brightening as he thought about his grandchildren. "She's been asking when she can show me her progress." These moments, when Charles could focus on the joy his grandchildren brought to his life, provided a welcome respite from the ongoing tensions with Camilla. The children represented the future of the monarchy, and their happiness and well-being remained his top priority despite the family conflicts. But even these pleasant conversations were shadowed by the reality of Camilla's deteriorating mental state. Her eavesdropping had become almost obsessive, and she was interpreting even innocent comments as evidence of conspiracies against her. That evening, as the royal household prepared for dinner, the staff moved with unusual care. They had all learned to recognize the warning signs of Camilla's volatile moods, and tonight she seemed particularly agitated. Her lady-in-waiting had reported that she had changed clothes 3 times, expressing dissatisfaction with everything in her wardrobe. William arrived with the family at the usual time, hoping for a more peaceful evening than they had experienced in recent weeks. Kate helped the children wash their hands while William spoke quietly with his father about some routine royal business. "Papa, can I tell Grandpa about my night project tonight?" George asked excitedly as they walked toward the dining room. "Of course you can," William replied, ruffling his son's hair. "I'm sure he'll be very interested to hear what you've learned." The family gathered around the dining table with cautious optimism. Charles had implemented Kate's suggestion about making the evening more casual, and the table setting reflected a more relaxed atmosphere. Instead of the usual formal place settings, they had opted for a family-style service that encouraged conversation and interaction. "I understand someone has been learning about medieval knights," Charles said warmly as they began their meal. Directing his attention to George, the young prince's face lit up immediately. "Yes. Did you know that knights had to train for 7 years before they could become real knights? They started as pages when they were just little kids." As George enthusiastically shared his knowledge, the adults around the table began to relax. Charlotte chimed in with her own questions about horses and castles, while Louis listened with wide-eyed fascination to his brother's stories about armor and swords. For a few minutes, it felt like a normal family dinner. The conversation flowed naturally. Everyone was engaged and smiling, and the tensions that had plagued recent gatherings seemed to have lifted. But Camilla sat in relative silence, picking at her food while watching the interactions around the table. In her current state of mind, she interpreted the easy conversation between Charles and Kate as further evidence of their special relationship. Every time Charles laughed at something Kate said, every time he nodded approvingly at her comments about the children, felt like a betrayal of his marriage vows. "How fascinating," Camilla said suddenly, her voice cutting through George's animated description of jousting tournaments. "It sounds like you've learned quite a lot from your tutoring sessions." There was something in her tone that made the adults look up sharply. The children, still focused on their conversation, didn't immediately notice the change in atmosphere. "Yes," George replied happily. "Mama helped me find some really good books about castles and knights. We even watched some documentaries together." "How wonderful that your mother has so much time to help with your education," Camilla continued, her voice taking on an edge. "I suppose, when you have people to handle all your other responsibilities, you can focus on whatever interests you most." Kate felt her stomach tighten as she recognized the direction Camilla's comments were heading. William immediately became alert to the potential danger, while Charles shot his wife a warning look that she chose to ignore. "Actually," Kate said carefully, attempting to defuse the situation, "we all work together to support the children's education. It's one of the benefits of having such a close family." "Close family," Camilla repeated with a bitter laugh. Yes, some members certainly seem closer than others. The children had stopped talking, sensing that something was wrong even if they didn't understand what was happening. Charlotte looked uncertainly at her parents, while George's excitement about his night project began to fade as he picked up on the tension around the table. Charles decided to intervene before the situation could escalate further. Camilla, perhaps we should discuss whatever is bothering you in private, after dinner. Oh, I'm sure you'll discuss it, she snapped, her control beginning to slip. I'm sure you and Kate will have a lovely private conversation about how to handle the unreasonable queen consort. You seem to have so many of those intimate little chats. William immediately began gathering the children's things, recognizing that another explosive confrontation was imminent. Kate helped him, both parents working quickly but calmly to remove their children from what was clearly about to become a very adult conflict. Why is Grandmama Camilla angry again? Charlotte whispered to her mother as Kate helped her from her chair. She's just having a difficult evening, sweetheart, Kate replied quietly, maintaining her composure despite her own stress. Sometimes grown-ups have feelings they need to work through, but Camilla overheard the exchange and interpreted it as yet another example of Kate positioning herself as the reasonable adult, while painting Camilla as the problem. Her anger, which had been building for weeks, finally reached its breaking point. Don't you dare explain my behavior to those children, she screamed, her voice echoing through the dining room. Don't you dare stand there looking so understanding and patient while you poison their minds against me. The outburst was more intense than any of her previous episodes. Her face was flushed with rage, her hands were shaking, and her voice had reached a pitch that could be heard throughout the castle. The children looked terrified, clinging to their parents as the adult world around them seemed to explode into chaos. Charles stood up immediately, his own anger finally breaking through his usual diplomatic restraint. You will not scream at Kate or the children, he said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of both a king and a protective family patriarch. You will not use their presence here as an audience for your accusations and paranoia. The word paranoia hit Camilla like a physical blow. In her mind, it confirmed every fear she had about how Charles truly saw her. She was no longer his beloved wife and partner, but a problem to be managed. A mentally unstable woman whose feelings and concerns could be dismissed as irrational. Paranoia? She repeated, her voice now dangerously quiet. You think I'm paranoid for noticing that my own husband turns to another woman for advice about our marriage? You think I'm paranoid for seeing how you light up when she enters a room in ways you never do for me anymore? William had succeeded in getting the children out of the dining room, but their voices could still be heard in the hallway as he tried to distract them from the shouting. Kate remained near the door, ready to leave but unwilling to abandon Charles to handle the situation alone. Your jealousy of Kate is destroying our family, Charles said, his voice heavy with sadness and frustration. She has done nothing but try to support this family and the crown. Your inability to see that says more about your state of mind than about her actions. The conversation had crossed a line from which there might be no return. Charles had essentially accused his wife of being mentally unstable, while Camilla had voiced suspicions that struck at the very heart of their marriage. Kate finally spoke, her voice steady despite the emotional chaos around her. I think I should go. This is clearly a conversation you two need to have without me present. Yes, run away again, Camilla said bitterly. Leave me here to be the villain while you escape to your perfect family and your perfect life. I'm not running away, Kate replied calmly. I'm trying to give you and Charles the space you need to work through whatever is troubling you, but I won't continue to be the target of accusations that have no basis in reality. With that, Kate left the dining room, following William and the children toward the exit. Her departure left Charles and Camilla alone to face the wreckage of their relationship, but instead of bringing them together, it only emphasized the gulf that had opened between them. The silence that followed Kate's departure was deafening. Charles and Camilla stood on opposite sides of the dining table, looking at each other across what felt like an unbridgeable chasm. The woman he had married, the woman who had been his strength through so many challenges, seemed like a stranger consumed by jealousy and suspicion. I can't continue like this, Charles said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. This jealousy, these accusations, the way you treat Kate and the children, it has to stop. Or what? Camilla challenged. You'll choose her over me? You'll cast aside your wife for your precious daughter-in-law? Charles closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the pain of watching his marriage disintegrate. I won't choose anyone over anyone else. But I also won't allow you to destroy the relationships that hold this family together. The conversation continued for another hour, covering the same ground repeatedly without reaching any resolution. Camilla remained convinced that Charles and Kate had formed an inappropriate emotional alliance, while Charles insisted that his relationship with Kate was purely familial and professional. By the time they finally separated for the evening, both were emotionally exhausted and no closer to understanding each other's perspective. The castle once again fell into the heavy silence that had become its normal evening atmosphere, with family members retreating to separate spaces to process the latest conflict. In the staff quarters, the royal employees discussed the situation in hushed tones. Many of them had worked for the royal family for years, and they had never seen such sustained discord within the household. Some worried about job security if the family conflicts became public, while others genuinely cared about the individuals involved and wanted to see them find peace. The silence that settled over Windsor Castle that night was different from previous evenings. It carried with it a sense of finality, as if something fundamental had shifted in the family dynamics. The harsh words that had been spoken, the accusations that had been made, and the emotional wounds that had been inflicted would not easily heal. Charles stood once more at his study windows, looking out at the darkened gardens and wondering how his family had reached this point. The crown had prepared him for many challenges, but it had not prepared him for watching the woman he loved lose herself to jealousy and suspicion. The weight of his position meant that his personal problems could not remain private indefinitely. If Camilla's behavior continued to deteriorate, if the family conflicts escalated further, they would inevitably spill into the public sphere and damage the monarchy itself. For the first time since ascending to the throne, Charles found himself questioning whether love and duty could coexist, whether personal happiness and royal responsibility were fundamentally incompatible. The silence around him offered no easy answers, only the promise of more difficult decisions ahead. 2 months had passed since the explosive confrontation in the dining room, and the royal household had developed an elaborate system of scheduling to ensure that Camilla and Kate rarely found themselves in the same location at the same time. The arrangement worked for official duties, but it created an artificial and unsustainable division within what was supposed to be a united royal family. Charles had aged visibly during this period. The constant stress of managing family conflicts while maintaining his royal duties had taken a toll that was becoming increasingly difficult to hide from the public. His private secretary, Sir Anthony Hartwell, had begun suggesting that perhaps it was time to seek outside professional help for what had clearly become more than a simple family disagreement. Your Majesty, Sir Anthony said carefully during their morning briefing, the palace communications team has received several inquiries from journalists about the Queen Consort's reduced public appearances. We need to consider how to address these questions before speculation gets out of hand. Charles rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar stress headache that had become his constant companion. What kind of inquiries are they making? Nothing accusatory yet, but they're noticing patterns. Camilla hasn't appeared at any events where Kate is present for 6 weeks. They're starting to ask whether there are scheduling conflicts or if there might be other reasons for the separation. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the study door. Kate entered, looking as composed as always but with subtle signs of strain around her eyes that Charles had learned to recognize. I apologize for interrupting, she said, but we need to discuss the children's Christmas plans. William and I are concerned about how to handle the holidays given the current situation. Christmas had always been a special time for the royal family, with elaborate celebrations that brought together multiple generations. But this year, the prospect of extended family gatherings filled everyone with anxiety rather than anticipation. Sir Anthony excused himself diplomatically, leaving Charles and Kate to discuss the sensitive family arrangements. These conversations had become even more crucial as they tried to navigate the increasingly complex dynamics of royal life while protecting the children from the worst of the adult conflicts. George has been asking whether Grandmama Camilla will be at Christmas dinner, Kate continued once they were alone. He doesn't understand why she seems angry all the time. and he's starting to worry that he did something wrong. This was exactly what Charles had feared most. The children, who should have been protected from adult problems, were beginning to internalize the family tensions and blame themselves for the conflicts they witnessed. "What have you told him?" Charles asked, settling wearily into his chair. "That sometimes grown-ups go through difficult periods and need time to work things out," Kate replied. "But he's old enough now to sense when explanations don't quite add up. And Charlotte has started asking why Grandmama Camilla doesn't smile anymore." The impact on his grandchildren broke Charles's heart in ways that the conflicts with Camilla never could. These innocent young people, who represented the future of the monarchy, were being exposed to dysfunction that could shape their understanding of family relationships for years to come. "I've been thinking about Dr. Thornfield's suggestions," Charles said quietly. "About professional counseling and support. Maybe it's time to approach Camilla directly about getting help, regardless of how she might initially react." Kate nodded thoughtfully. "The current situation isn't sustainable. Either we find a way to help her work through whatever is causing these problems, or we need to consider more dramatic changes to protect everyone involved, especially the children." Neither of them spoke aloud what more dramatic changes might entail, but the implication hung in the air between them. Separation, either temporary or permanent, was becoming a possibility that could no longer be ignored. As if summoned by their conversation about her, Camilla appeared in the doorway of the study. She had been listening again, a habit that had become compulsive, despite the pain it inevitably caused her. "Discussing more dramatic changes, are we?" she said, her voice cold and controlled in a way that was somehow more frightening than her previous emotional outbursts. "Planning my future, without bothering to include me in the conversation." Charles and Kate exchanged a quick look, both recognizing that they had been caught in another private discussion about Camilla's situation. But instead of apologizing or trying to explain, Charles decided that honesty might finally be the only path forward. "Yes, we were," he said simply, "because your behavior has become impossible to manage or predict, and it's affecting everyone in this family, including children who don't deserve to be exposed to this level of conflict." Camilla stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind her with deliberate precision. Her appearance was immaculate as always, but there was something unsettling about her composure that suggested carefully controlled rage rather than genuine calm. "How convenient that you've already decided I'm the problem that needs to be managed," she said, moving to stand near the windows where Charles often positioned himself. "How convenient that perfect Kate is here to help you plan the best way to deal with your difficult wife." Kate remained silent, recognizing that anything she said would likely be twisted and used as further evidence of whatever conspiracy Camilla believed existed between them. But her presence in the room was itself inflammatory, regardless of her intentions. "This isn't about Kate," Charles said firmly. "This is about your inability to control your emotions, your constant accusations, and your apparent belief that everyone around you is plotting against you. These are not the characteristics of someone who is mentally well." The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down between them. Charles had finally said explicitly what had been implied in their previous conversations, that he believed Camilla was suffering from mental health issues that required professional intervention. "So now I'm mentally ill?" Camilla asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Is that the story you and Kate have constructed to explain away my entirely reasonable concerns about your relationship?" "What relationship?" Kate finally spoke, her patience finally reaching its limit. "What exactly do you think is happening between Charles and me that justifies months of accusations and hostility?" Camilla turned to face Kate directly, her eyes blazing with accumulated resentment and suspicion. "I think you've positioned yourself as his primary confidant and advisor. I think you've made yourself indispensable to him in ways that should belong to his wife. I think you enjoy being the reasonable, supportive woman who understands him better than his actual spouse." The accusation was devastating in its specificity and its complete misinterpretation of Kate's motivations. Kate had indeed become important to Charles, but as a daughter-in-law who had proven herself capable and trustworthy, not as a replacement for his wife. "You're describing a relationship that exists only in your imagination," Kate replied steadily. "I support Charles because he's my father-in-law and my king, Not because I have any personal agenda. Your inability to see that says nothing about my behavior, and everything about your state of mind. The confrontation that followed was unlike anything the royal household had previously witnessed. Camilla abandoned all pretense of royal dignity, screaming accusations that became increasingly wild and disconnected from reality. She accused Kate of deliberately undermining her marriage, of turning Charles against her, of plotting to destroy her position as queen consort. Charles watched his wife's complete breakdown with a mixture of heartbreak and horror. The woman who had been his companion through decades of challenges, who had supported him through his mother's death and his ascension to the throne, seemed to have disappeared entirely, replaced by someone consumed by paranoia and jealousy. "You need help," he said when her screaming finally subsided into exhausted sobbing. "Professional help. This level of suspicion and anger isn't normal. And it's destroying not just our marriage but our entire family." "The only thing destroying our family is her," Camilla gasped, pointing at Kate with a shaking hand. "And your refusal to see what she's doing to us." Kate had heard enough. Rising from her chair with quiet dignity, she addressed both Charles and Camilla with calm finality. "I won't continue to be the target of these accusations. I won't subject my children to this level of dysfunction. And I won't stand by while this family tears itself apart over imaginary problems." She paused at the door, looking back at Charles with genuine sympathy. "I hope you can find a way to help her," she said softly. "But until she gets that help, I need to protect my family from this situation." Kate's departure left Charles and Camilla alone to confront the wreckage of their relationship and their family. The study, which had been the setting for so many crucial royal discussions over the years, now felt like a battlefield where a war had been fought and lost. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. It carried with it a sense of ending, of possibilities foreclosed, and relationships damaged beyond repair. Charles looked at his wife, seeing not the woman he had loved but a stranger whose pain had transformed into something destructive and dangerous. Over the following weeks, Charles made the most difficult decisions of his reign. With the support of Dr. Thornfield and other medical professionals, he arranged for Camilla to receive intensive counseling and psychiatric evaluation. The process was handled with absolute discretion, but it required temporary separation and reduced public duties. The official explanation given to the press was that the queen consort was taking a brief hiatus for personal reasons and to focus on her health. But within royal circles, everyone understood that something fundamental had shifted in the family dynamics. Kate and William, with Charles's full support, gradually resumed their normal level of involvement in family activities. The children, relieved to be in environments free from adult conflict, began to relax and return to their natural exuberance. Christmas, when it finally arrived, was quiet but genuinely peaceful for the first time in months. Charles spent the holiday period reflecting on the lessons learned from this crisis. He had been forced to choose between enabling his wife's destructive behavior and protecting the other members of his family, including young children who had no power to protect themselves. The choice, when finally made, had been clear but heartbreaking. His support of Kate throughout the crisis had not been about choosing her over Camilla, but about recognizing that Kate's behavior had been consistently reasonable and supportive, while Camilla's had become increasingly erratic and harmful. Dr. Thornfield's evaluation confirmed what Charles had suspected. Camilla was suffering from a combination of depression, anxiety, and what appeared to be symptoms consistent with a personality disorder that had been exacerbated by the stress of royal life. The condition was treatable, but it would require time, professional help, and Camilla's own commitment to recovery. As winter settled over Windsor Castle, the royal household began to find its rhythm again. The careful scheduling that had once been necessary to avoid confrontations was gradually relaxed, as family members learned to trust that their gatherings would be peaceful and productive. Kate continued her royal duties with the same grace and competence that had always characterized her service, but she carried with her the knowledge that being right didn't always feel like victory. She had been vindicated in her approach to the family crisis, but she took no pleasure in Camilla's breakdown or the pain it had caused everyone involved. The silence that now filled Windsor Castle was not the oppressive quiet of unspoken tensions, but the peaceful calm of a household that had weathered a serious storm and emerged stronger. It was the silence of children who could play without worrying about adult conflicts, of staff who could work without walking on eggshells, of family members who could interact with genuine affection rather than careful diplomacy. Charles stood at his study windows on a clear January morning, watching his grandchildren build a snowman in the garden below. Their laughter carried up to his window, a sound he had missed more than he realized during the months of family turmoil. Kate appeared in the garden, helping Charlotte shape the snowman's head while George worked on finding the perfect stick for arms. The scene was ordinary and precious, representing the kind of simple family joy that Charles had feared might be lost forever. The crisis had taught him that leadership sometimes required making choices that broke your heart but protected the people who depended on you. His decision to prioritize his family's well-being over his wife's immediate comfort had been agonizing, but it had been correct. Camilla's treatment was ongoing, with cautious optimism from her medical team about eventual recovery and reconciliation. But even if that reconciliation never came, Charles had learned that he could live with the consequences of choosing love and protection over enabling and denial. The silence that surrounded him now spoke not of endings, but of new beginnings. It spoke of children who felt safe, of family relationships that could flourish without the poison of suspicion and jealousy, of royal duties that could be performed with joy rather than dread. In the garden below, little Louis had joined his siblings, throwing snowballs with delighted squeals that echoed off the castle walls. Kate's laughter joined theirs, creating a symphony of happiness that reached Charles's heart in ways that formal ceremonies and royal protocols never could. For the first time in months, the future looked bright, rather than fraught with danger. The royal family would continue to face challenges, as all families do, but they would face them together, united by love, rather than divided by jealousy and fear. The silence spoke volumes about healing, about the power of choosing hope over despair, about the courage required to make difficult decisions in service of protecting the innocent. It was a silence full of possibilities rather than regrets, of laughter waiting to be heard rather than arguments waiting to explode. As Charles turned from his window to begin another day of royal duties, he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on public stages but in private moments. Not with grand gestures but with quiet decisions to choose love over fear, truth over comfort, protection over enabling. The silence would always remember this time of testing and transformation, but more importantly, it would carry forward the sound of children's laughter and the promise of better days ahead.